All right, joining me on the podcast today, we've got the infamous lawyer, entertainment lawyer slash drummer for One Bad Son, Kurt Dahl. Kurt, tell me a little bit about how you amalgamated those two careers and put those together in one initiative.
You're
Which came
starting.
first, the lawyer or the drummer?
You're starting off with a bang here. I see with the big question. Um, you
Yes,
know,
it's the one
yeah,
on everybody's mind, I'm sure.
yeah, I bet. I guess I'll start by saying I didn't have like a lifelong aspiration to become a lawyer. I mean, when I went to law school, some of my classmates knew from age like 7 they're going to be a lawyer. That wasn't me. What I did know is I wanted to be a rock star. And I wanted to be in the music biz. So I guess the musician came first. I was a fan of music first and foremost, and that if I wasn't a fan of music, my life would be so different. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now, right? Um, so I guess in my teens, I started reading biographies of all my rock idols, and I realized there was a common thread between all these biographies, and that was that my idol in each of these biographies was exploited and taken advantage of by someone in a suit, by a bad contract, and it really irrevocably affected their careers. So, and then once I started
So
playing
let
in
me
band,
just stop you there for 1 second.
yeah,
Let me stop you there. So who were some of those influences, Kurt? Name those people for us.
I mean, literally everyone. I mean, Willie Nelson, Pete Townsend, the guys in, well, Bob Dylan, Led Zeppelin, Neil Young. I mean, you name it. It's almost without exception. Leonard Cohen, his manager took every dollar he had and then some.
That was a brutal
Um,
one.
yeah, so I mean, and I started playing in bands and realizing that all my contemporaries that I was playing with had similar stories. That signed a bad deal. There's a snake out there in the music business. As we know, there's many of them out there, and they were taken advantage of. So I got the idea at some point along the way to, if I became an entertainment lawyer, I could stop that from happening and help out, myself. So it wasn't entirely altruistic, but I could help out other musicians as well, from the snakes in the music biz. And then at some point, I decided to, on a whim, I wrote the LSAT. I was going to university already. I wrote the LSAT just on a random weekend. I just wrote it, and lo and behold, this guy actually did okay on it. I did really good on it. So I thought, well, maybe that's a sign. Maybe I should be a lawyer. So yeah, went to law school. But when I graduated, I mean, all my classmates went right into the high-paying jobs and paying down student loans, which I had plenty of those. But I didn't. I didn't go into being a lawyer. I wanted to become a rock star. So it was during law school that One Bad Son was formed, and so I graduated law school, and as one promoter coined it, I was called to a different kind of bar, and OBS started to tour. We started to tour the country, and doing the 40-hour drives to Thunder Bay to make $400. We did that. We toured every nook and cranny of this country, and around that time, as you remember very well, around 2008, 2009 is when the illegal downloading issue sort of hit the music biz. And as I'm sure you can remember, I mean, it was like the sky was falling. The music biz was collapsing because of Napster and LimeWire and all that sort of stuff. So that's sort of when the light bulb went off that if I could combine my two passions, law and music, into some sort of thesis, I could really be onto something. So that's what I did. I wrote a Master of Laws thesis on the future of the music biz and how artists will continue to make a living in the music biz in the digital world. And the rest is history. I mean, once I did that, I mean, it sort of lit a fire in me that's seems to grow every year. So in terms of combining music and law and helping out musicians.
It's It's interesting that you were so proactive in your approach, and obviously you're armed with the the ability and the ambition to go after what you wanted. But it's also equally interesting to me that this business just seems to attract on the industry side a certain type of individual, and some of those individuals are really driven to give back value and passionately and honestly do everything they can in their power to help artists move their careers forward, and some people are just there to take advantage. And it's amazing how many of those people continue to evolve in the business, even though they've got a reputation that isn't great. And I think at the root of that, a lot of times is artist desperation, because a lot of artists have taken things in house and done things themselves for so long, and they're so relieved and so happy when someone finally comes along and tells them what they want to hear, that they ignore the warning signs about that individual or their reputation, or they turn a blind eye to it in hopes that that maybe things will be different this time. But you do see some of the same characters getting recycled time and time again in this business, who I think are causing damage. Sometimes it's on an unconscious level, though. Like, I actually think there's lots of people out there who don't necessarily bring value to an artist's career, but they don't feel like they're doing a bad job. And they do love music and they do love artists. It's a strange dynamic to navigate as an artist, to watch these industry people who aren't necessarily being helpful, but it's not always coming from a place of maliciousness.
You're right. Yeah, I think it's not as simple as, yeah, good guy, bad guy, as my 4-year-old would say. There's good guys and bad guys. It's not that simple in the music biz, right? And you're right. At the heart of it is dreams. When dreams are at stake, people will do they'll do anything. They'll sign anything. They'll do anything to achieve that dream. And the dreams are sort of the carrot that's always dangled, right? And that's why you see like contracts that are signed in the music biz that would never fly in the regular business world, but somehow they're common in the music biz, right? I think it's all to do with dreams.
And to allude back to your other point of when things started to collapse, and I saw it happening a lot earlier, around, I would say, the year 2000, when Napster really started to go to war with bands like Metallica, and labels got into this fear-driven headspace where they started suing their consumers and actually turning the tide of public support against them at the time. And it was a very odd time to be in the music business, because you kept hearing that the sky is falling, but me being on the live side, it wasn't really impacting or affecting it as much. I had a lot of empathy for what my friends were going through in the label business, but there was also a part of me that was like, maybe you guys should be on the forefront of solving this problem, hiring the experts to do that, taking the attitude that you did, which is, I'm not going to sit back and be a victim to circumstances. I am going to figure out how to acquire the skill sets in order to make sure I never become a victim. And I didn't see a lot of that from the labels at the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like you said, charging $29 for a CD or something, for a double CD, maybe that's a bit much, So I think you're right. It's sort of the adapt.
Especially when the artist is only getting a tiny fraction of that money. The creators are getting a tiny fraction, right? Like, I think everybody can allocate that there's a market value to art, and whatever the consumer is willing to pay for that might be considered fair. But if for one reason or the other, the artist and the creators in the process, the writers and the producers, aren't benefiting from it, well, then it's like it's hard to find sympathy for some of those big companies, because some of them did have very exploitive contracts for a long time. The Bruce Springsteen story is an infamous one. We won't get into it now, but he talked about how unfair his royalty rate was for years, and how he was billed back, for every label party, every limo ride, and went public about it. And there's some great information on the internet that I would encourage young artists to check out as well. But you took an entirely different approach to that. That's very commendable.
Yeah, that's another example of, The Boss. That was just horribly exploited. Yeah.
Now, speaking of exploitation and your desire to turn the tide in that world, tell us about your pro bono work with Die Jim Crow Records. Tell us all about that program, why you're involved, and why you see so much promise in that moving forward.
Yeah, well, so this is just a random, you know, I get a lot of emails every day through my website, because I post a lot of articles that are helpful to musicians, about music industry topics. And so I get a lot of emails saying, would you help out? We need a lawyer, but we can't afford it or whatever. And, I do as much as I can pro bono, but, there's obviously certain limits. But this one, so it's a record label in the US called Die Jim Crow. It's essentially what they do is record and release music from incarcerated musicians. And in America, as people I'm sure are well aware, there's an incarceration problem, and the numbers are very much, black people are, especially black males and females are just, the percentages are through the roof compared to white incarcerated people. So the focus is on recording the music of black musicians and releasing it to the public, and giving those people a voice. And
is it exclusively black musicians, or is it available for all incarcerated individuals?
Yeah, it's available for everyone. I mean, just based on the percentages, though, it happens to be mostly black people, because that's in America, that's the norm. And just like in Canada, it's Indigenous people that are taking up a majority of the prison system, right? So, anyways, he reached out. The owner of the label reached out to me well before the whole George Floyd murder, and said, would you help me out with this label? And right away I was hit by it. I mean, I was passionate about the cause, giving a voice to the voiceless. And on top of that, the music was great. So I thought that always helps, And then the George Floyd murder happened, and that just really, the timeliness of it just really hit me. I said, let's really do this. And so what they needed was a record deal drafted between the label and all these incarcerated musicians to make sure it's all legal. And when money comes in, they know who it's going to and all that sort of stuff. So, I just said, listen, and I don't usually do this, but I said, this entire thing is pro bono. Like, whatever you need done, I'm doing it. Which as a lawyer, you should always be careful of saying whatever you need, it's all pro bono, because that the sky's the limit. And that once you say that, but
sounds like a slippery slope.
Yeah, but it honestly, I feel like it's just, I'm very fortunate in my life, and I work my ass off on my career. And, if I'm able to give back even just in this way, in small ways here and there, it's like, I feel like I get as much out of it as I'm sure I'm giving, So yeah, music's out there.
How does the royalty structure break down in a situation like that? Are these prisoners and people who are doing time, are they actually able to collect checks while they're in prison off their music, or how's that all working?
And that's, kind of an accounting question, but yes, like the plant, it's a standard 50-50 deal after they recoup their expenses, which are very minimal. So yeah, I believe right now they're sort of holding revenue in trust for these artists once they get out of jail, I believe. But yeah, I mean, some of these songs have started to get some traction on Spotify and on YouTube. And so when these musicians get out, and a lot of them are in for like minor offenses, but of course,
drug possession, that sort of thing.
Yeah, or like missing a court appearance, and all of a sudden you're going to jail for it. So once they're out, I mean, they're going to have a little bit of cash in their pocket. I think it's like, to me, it's pretty inspiring to be involved with it.
Well, and probably just the creative outlet gives them something to focus on that has real utility in their life, right? Like, I've talked about this on other podcasts. I really believe that the antidote to a society full of sad, angry, hurt people who are causing more hurt is personal fulfillment, right? And by the way, it's easy to achieve that when you've had all the tools available, good education, good upbringing. If you haven't had those advantages, then it's a totally different story. And so, if you guys can inspire people to pursue their passions in realms of creativity, that is going to put them on a different path in their lives. And really, that's what we're all gunning for. You want a good society. You want everybody on the right path, and everybody's got to choose their own path. But if they haven't been exposed to the opportunities whereby they might realize that they do have a passion for live music or creativity, they're never going to get there, and they're going to, end up reverting to their own old habits and their old patterns, right? So, I mean, whether or not they make a ton of money or have a hit song, just channeling that energy into creativity is probably a massive gift that you give people that they just haven't had, and that opportunity hasn't existed up until this point. So it's a beautiful thing you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jim. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I think, I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have music in my life, and who knows what path I would have been on if I didn't discover music. And I was a, middle class white dude, and so I had a lot of privilege and a lot of,
Advantages.
advantages. Yeah, exactly. So I can only imagine. You're right. Someone who comes from nothing and is told, society tells them every day that they're not in the same position as, say, you or I. That I think that's got to be hard. So music, I think I've said it for decades. I mean, music is an amazing healer, and it's also a great connector. It connects. I can relate with anyone pretty much on the planet through music, and regardless of their political views or religious views, whatever. I could probably even relate to Trump through music somehow. That'd be a stretch, but I could probably find some song that he likes that I like.
Right. Well, music is a unifier, right? Art is a unifier, and it brings people together, helps them celebrate camaraderie around a beat and a lyric and a melody that means something to them. And so we can't underestimate the power of it, especially in times like this. Speaking of which, you've also recently been tapped by the New York Post to do an article on the Lady A situation and the name change and how that turned into a real mess with Lady Antebellum migrating over to take the Lady A moniker, which is interesting because all of us in the industry have called them Lady A since inception.
Right.
And there was another artist who happened to be a black artist, a female artist who went by Lady A. She's actually Lady A White, and there's been a dispute over that. So walk us through that a little bit in terms of how you see it as an attorney and where you feel like some of the mistakes were made as Lady A, the band, moved into this space.
Yeah, and that's a great way of framing it. So many mistakes were made. I'm guessing their intent was they had a good intent initially because they took the steps to actually go and change it, right? But I think it's like someone compared it to when you start to just swerve off the road a bit and you overcorrect, and then all of a sudden you create a situation that's much worse than
you're in a worse car accident than you would have been if you'd just driven off the road. Yeah, totally. And that's a good analogy. I get it.
Yeah, I think initially, their intent was great. Let's really be the positive change that we want to see in the world. I think they were given poor advice by either their manager, their label, or their lawyer, or maybe all three, because they didn't adequately research Lady A. I think they probably did do some research. I mean, they had to have Googled it at least, and they filed a trademark for it back in, I think, 2010. But so they must have found that this artist exists, I think, in Seattle, Lady A.
Lady A White.
Yeah, my guess is, and I've heard this from a few sources that she was Lady A White was getting maybe 50 streams or something a week. So I think that she wasn't that big of a presence in terms of her reach. So my guess is they found it. They found her and said, "Well, it's a small time artist. Let's just proceed with it." What they should have done is probably reached out then and said, "Listen, we're going to change our name. Can we put together some sort of arrangement?" Because optically, they just went forward with it anyways. And then, of course, the dynamics of three powerful white people, because they are powerful based on how big they are, against one not as powerful black woman. Like the optics are horrible. It just looked bad. And then, of course, the press got it, and it's hard to, when you read the headline. I mean, Lady Antebellum, the band, is suing Lady A White to stop her from using the name, which is not true. They're suing they're suing her to ensure that she can't sue them, essentially.
Right.
Like
it's sort of a preemptive move.
Yeah, they want to be able to both use the name. So I think it just, but you see the headline. I mean, every headline I saw related to this, it's just like, of course, Lady A, the band, just looks horrible. But and then of course the other background is that Lady A White reportedly asked for $10 million in order for them to use the name. So that
seems like a steep price. Like, if you were negotiating a situation like that, what would you think would be the fairer price?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'd have to like look at the numbers, obviously, and dig into them. But 10 million, like, that's a lot of money. And I guess you'd have to quantify it somehow, but by saying, here's why we think it's 2 million. I don't know. So yeah, I think it looks bad on her behalf. It kind of looks like she's being a bit opportunistic. I would say going for 10 mil, but at the end of the day,
but so were they. That's the prime. This is a hypothesis. I'm just pontificating here, but my thought is they registered the trademark in 2010. They could have made the name change then. It probably looked like an opportunistic time with everything that had happened in terms of Black Lives Matter and the BLM movement, the George Floyd murder, that, hey, we want to show the world that we are ready to make a change and leave behind this name that we believe has a tie to to the South, which it does. But I think that's part of the bad advice that probably came from either the legal team or the manager, where it's like, hey, let's just slow down and do this properly, because if we fuck this up, this could be catastrophic. And I find that sometimes in our desire to get to the marketplace with good news in this business, we often leave common sense at the curbside, and we shouldn't do that. And it looks to me like that's partially what happened here.
Yeah, and that's a great point, that they were almost preemptively patting themselves on the back for being so woke, And you're right. I think they didn't plan it properly, and I mean, the results are pretty catastrophic. I mean, when they go back on, when this whole thing slows down, or COVID, et cetera, and they go back on tour, I mean, I'm sure it's going to have a huge impact on their career.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if the fans care, or if they're still involved in where they still care primarily about the music and the hits. It will certainly impact their chances to get on shows like Kimmel or Good Morning America. Like, that's going to be a real problem, because the bookers and producers for those shows are typically very sensitive to what's happening culturally, right? So it's going to affect them on that front without a doubt. It's going to be an interesting experiment to see whether or not their attendance drops as a result of this, and whether or not they can measure that based on what they've done previously. So who knows? I mean, I wish them the best. They're really good people. I've met them a few times. I've worked with them a couple of times, and I know they're not racist. They're not terrible human beings. They thought they were doing something really good. They fucked up the execution, and now they're in this mess, and it makes them look really bad. So as a point of advice, I'm sure, as an attorney, there's like general advice you can give that, hey, listen, if you want to do something that you think makes you look really good, you better vet it out. But what else could they have done procedurally to make sure that they were on track with this?
Yeah, and I guess just do better research in terms of what artists are out there using this name. Like I said, I would have reached out to Lady A White well before they made the change and say, listen, we're thinking about doing this change. And then if she would have said, sure, 10 million, then they could have decided, okay, either we make a lower offer, like a lower offer, or we just go with a different name. I mean, or we send her a letter, like, don't let it get to don't change your name until you've got that name locked down, right?
Right. And the Dixie Chicks went through something similar where they changed their name from the Dixie Chicks to the Chicks. So I better call them the Chicks from now on. But there's a band in Australia that also has that name, but apparently they got better legal advice and they were able to work through it. And they're sharing the name, and so that one didn't backfire, which is good. You wouldn't have wanted two stories like this in the music business at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and there's always another thing that I always say to clients, like, you can win in a court of law, but lose in a court of popular opinion, and sometimes the court of popular opinion is a lot more damaging. You can win in court in front of a judge, but if the masses are not, if they're against you, which is the case with Lady A, the band, it can really cost you. And they may succeed in court. They may prove through their 2010 trademark that they were right, but that's not going to matter, like you said, when it comes time for Judgment Day with the press.
Yeah. I'd have sent the best negotiators on my team. Reached out to Lady A, send your agent or your attorney or whoever could get this deal done before you go to press. Like, send them in to negotiate a fair deal and get the rights to the name properly, and then make the announcement. But hindsight's always 2020, and it's easy for me to sit on the sidelines and say that. I understand the pressure of wanting to respond at a culturally sensitive time to the issue, but it just looks all kinds of bad. And I think it's a good reminder for the rest of us that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And sometimes we got to think about what we're doing in terms of, does it actually do good, or does it just feel good and look good on social media? What you're doing with Die Jim Crow Records, well, that does good. That is helping people find or potentially reinvigorate their purposes in terms of creativity. And it gives them a creative outlet for wherever they might be channeling that energy that might not necessarily be good for society or themselves. But a situation like this, it's just rushed to the market to look good, and always dangerous when something like that happens. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing as well with Sask Music, because you play a major role with that organization, and you have for years now. And again, in doing good, you have helped foster the careers of a lot of artists, spread some money around to make sure that people are getting an opportunity to stick with their creativity or finance that side hustle until they can migrate over to doing it full time. Tell us a little bit about the mandate of Sask Music and your role within it.
Yeah. So, Sask Music, I guess the mandate is we're just fostering and developing and growing the music industry in this province, and so we get some funding from the provincial government, a little bit from the federal government. And so the ways in which we've done that recently, with the whole COVID situation, obviously devastating for all of us in the business. We just had some extra funding. We had just sort of a rainy day fund, and we all agreed that this is a rainy day. This is about as rainy as it gets in the music biz. So we just took that money and dished it out to our members. Just put an application in saying how much you've lost from being affected by COVID, and we sent out $55,000 to musicians in the province, which that's this much of the need, right? Like, we could have done 10 times that, and that'd still just be scratching the surface. So, I would have liked to have done more, but at least it was a starting point, and then we have something that I've been doing now for about 5 years, and it's the Sask Music legal program. So we basically, if you're a Sask Music member, you apply and you can access free legal advice, and I'm the one that provides it. And we sort of cap it at 2 hours of legal advice. So if you're negotiating an 80-page pub deal, well, it's not going to cover all of that, but at least it'll cover your first couple hours of negotiating, and then mostly just giving advice, initial sort of summary advice on things. And a lot of times I see contracts, it's I help musicians not avoid signing those contracts that we talked about at the beginning of this podcast,
And those contracts are still being offered on a fairly high frequency, you would say? And tell us a little bit about what an artist should look for in terms of what they should avoid. And we can start with, say, publishing deals. What's something that you see cropping up time and time again that's unfair and you're always pushing back on?
Yeah, good question, Jim. I see a lot of sort of record deals, and it could be even just a 1 or 2 song record deal that all of a sudden includes publishing in the deal, which those kind of deals exist all over the place. 360 deals, what we call them. But they just sort of, it's like a 1 paragraph thing, like, oh yeah, and we own all of your publishing too. And to me, that's a major red flag. If you're going to give up publishing, the label better be investing, like committing actual dollars to your career, or there's usually an advance involved of some sort, even if it's a little bit of advance just in the artist's pocket to help them live for a year or whatever. I mean, anytime publishing's being given away, I always say it's a red flag. You want to look into it and say, okay, because publishing, unlike a record deal, like on the master recording side, those master rights, maybe they last for 10 years, maybe they're perpetuity, but the publishing it lasts, it can go forever, right? It's the life of the author plus 50 to 75 years. So, and publishing still earns a lot of money these days, whereas, master recordings, they don't sell like they used to, so they're not as valuable as they used to be. Whereas publishing, music is used more than ever these days. Everywhere you go, music is ubiquitous. So, and the use of music generates money for whoever owns the publishing. Therefore, publishing is still very valuable.
But isn't that just labels trying to figure out a way to earn some money back when the stakes are higher than ever and people are selling less? I'm not sticking up for them. I'm just saying, like, I get it from that angle where they're like, all right, if we're not going to share in your merch or your live, if it's not an entirely full 360 deal, then we need some guaranteed source of revenue. And we believe that publishing is the best bet to close that gap. Isn't that usually where they're coming from with that intent?
100%. And I hope I'm not coming across as like, all labels are bad if they're asking for publishing. It's more so.
No.
It's more so. It's got to be more than a 2-sentence line in a contract. Like, hey, you're giving us all your publishing on every song you write during the next 5 years. That's we need to flush that out a bit with some.
Yeah, maybe there's a cap in there at some point, right? Or some sort of earnings cap for the label where if they make X amount of dollars, now it reverts back to a split. There's probably ways of negotiating something like that would just be a bit more equitable for the artist. And sort of to analogize it in layman terms, when you're doing a deal and selling publishing, it's sort of like you're selling a business. So you want to take a look at what the potential earnings of that are going to be moving forward in order to allocate a value to that so that you can go into the partnership in good faith.
Yeah. And if it mostly, I guess I'm trying to say, if it's a pub deal, then let's not pretend it's not, right? Like if you're giving away your publishing, the label's got to invest in your career to some extent and have some sort of knowledge of publishing, right? And that was the whole thing with like the Eagles when they signed their initial deal. They thought they were just giving away their record rights, but they gave away their publishing as well, and they had to buy that back, right? So it's the whole let's not pretend it's just a record deal when it's also a publishing deal, right? So that's a major red flag that often comes up.
Right. And as far as 360 deals are concerned, do you believe that by and large, and I know this is a major generalization, that if a label is going to ask for a partnership on all those revenue streams that we know to some degree are going to be guaranteed, especially if there's a hit, that they should be putting up an advance or potentially guaranteeing some level of expenditure on an artist in order to protect everyone involved in the agreement?
Right. Yeah. I guess the main thing is at the end of the day, if a label is going to ask for other parts of your revenue streams, live, merch, publishing, that's fine as long as they are, actively involved in those areas, right? So, if you're, with your operation, Jim, like label, but also you're handling booking and dealing with touring and promoting and all these things. I mean, that's different than just a label that's just going to release your music on iTunes, and then all of a sudden they're going to ask for 30% of your live revenues. Well, why are they entitled to part of your live revenues if they're not doing anything, right? And I see that happen, right? So,
right.
I think that's the main thing. It's just asking, and I obviously have a lot of label clients as well. So it's, although I often sound like I'm just always the artist advocate, I mean, I see it from both sides. Like, you know, these just trying to survive on record sales alone is next to impossible in 2020, right? So I understand the reasoning for accessing other revenue streams, but it just there has to be something given in those areas in order to warrant a percentage of them for the label, right?
Right. Yeah, and I mean that's I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, in the context of our company, we really believe that if we're going to ask for something, there has to be an exchange, right? So if we're going to commission a service, then it's to our advantage to make sure that we're performing that service to the best of our competence, and the artist feels like they're in a good partnership and they feel like they're being taken care of, and that someone's watching over the managerial aspects of their career as well as booking and promoting at times. And so, yeah, we make percentages on all of those components, but we're actively involved in each of them. So I do understand there's a difference there between someone who's just literally uploading your music, like you could do a deal direct as an artist with TuneCore, right?
Yeah.
They're just uploading it to iTunes and maybe, pushing it onto a few playlists at Spotify, but they're not actively involved in getting you gigs, press appearances, or really helping you out. So, and I think that's kind of like, that's a foundational issue in our business. It's like, we need to be very thoughtful and continually evolve the business models of this game so that we're not putting artists in a position where they're indentured servants. Because you know what? That's also not a good partnership. You're going to end up fighting with that artist at some point. You're going to end up with them hiring a guy like you in order to, renegotiate the deals, or it could even go to litigation. It's like, you want to think about partnerships with artists, I believe, like you do personal relationships to a degree. It's like not one party needs to be dominant over the other. You need a bit of an exchange. You need a bit of a challenge. You need everybody to have some skin in the game so that everyone feels invested in the best possible outcome for the artist. And when we lose sight of that mandate, that's where we end up with these really shitty deals. And they're not good for anybody in the long run. Like people might go, oh, the label makes a bunch of money, so they're winning and the artist is losing. But eventually that plays itself out.
Yeah. Yeah. You're so right. I mean, I think that's my goal as lawyer in a lot of these negotiations is, finding that perfect middle ground where both sides can win. Because and I've had this happen too, where the artist just wants to negotiate so hard that at the end of the negotiation, the label's not happy because, they feel like they've given too much, and you don't want that either, right? Because it's got to be. I like the idea of similar to a personal relationship. It's like both sides have to feel like they're winning, otherwise you're bound to fail, right?
Right, and that's a really good point too, because you have artists who are interested in getting the absolute best deal possible, and I understand that. I mean, I'm an advocate on behalf of artists too, but if you don't have your partners invested enough in you to where they're seeing the reciprocal value in that relationship, they will deprioritize you. It is the truth. It is a fact. If you want to be a priority for a label, manager, agent, make them a shit ton of money. You will be a priority by default. But if you're making them too much to the point where you're actually resentful, then it's probably not the right deal. But if you're making good money, they're making good money, everybody's winning, it's probably a relationship that's going to continue on in perpetuity for a long time.
Yeah, well said.
Tell us a little bit about time with the band. You guys have crushed it in the last year. You've had five top 10 hits. You've been the number one with Raging Bull. Like One Bad Son is not just a side project. You guys are actually making real impacts at Canadian rock radio, active rock radio. And what's the future for the band?
Good question. I think, it's crazy. Like this year, we've been together for 16 years, and seen many trends come and go. And, there was a time when I'd be on the road, 10 months of the year, like I said, like any touring artist, especially in Canada, knows, you know, there's so much road in this country. You can just tour forever and still only scratch the surface. But so we've done that. I don't feel like we're going to go back to that anytime soon, as far as like 10 months of the year on the road. But we're still writing music, which I'm very excited about. Yeah, I mean, last year we had that big show with the Rolling Stones, which was pretty amazing. And I feel like
okay, tell us about that day. That deserves some time on this podcast. So you guys opened for the Rolling Stones. Tell us about that experience. Walk us through that day a little bit too, because from what I've heard, they're very stringent with their opening bands in terms of rules and regulations and what those opening bands must comply to. And there's no messing around because it's the Rolling Stones. Yeah,
that's 100% accurate. You know, let's just say this, like I tried every angle I could. I used every ounce of charm I have, which depending on who you ask is maybe isn't that much, but I did everything I could to try to meet Keith and Mick. You know, like I would take either of them. You know, I've listened to the Stones all my life. I mean, I've got every record down in the basement. I've played them until the record's worn out. Like the Stones are one of my favorite bands of all time. So I did everything I could. I chatted with everyone backstage, all the security, all the local reps. You know what it's like backstage. There's so many different people that are in charge. I chatted with all of them to see if I could just shake Keith's hand, you know, and but it wasn't to be. You know, I got as far as the Stones security, and I said, you know, guys, you know, I'm one of the guys on the opening act. Kind of just shake his hand, and he's like, you know what? Keith has met everyone he needs to meet in this life, which I still laugh when.
That's a great answer. I'm gonna save that one. I like that. Yeah, that's funny.
But no, it was. And sorry, go ahead.
But the performance itself. I mean, how well did you guys connect with their audience?
I thought it was, you know, pretty amazing because, you know, rock fans are rock fans no matter where you go, right? And that's it. Kind of restoked my excitement for, or my belief in rock, because, you know, rock and roll in 2020, it's in a much different place than it was like in the 60s and 70s. You know, in a lot of ways, it's almost a niche, which is not what I'm used to. I mean, rock is king in my world. But when you watch the Stones play, you're just reminded of the power of rock and roll. And it was 70,000 people or 75,000 or something. And, you know, and they still got it. Like they're just this, to me, obviously this is arguable, but, you know, the greatest rock band of all time, I think they are a very high contender for that name, that title. And yeah, I mean, it was pretty incredible. I think that they're probably they're not going to get any better. I think they should probably hang up the gear pretty quickly, because they just are really old, you know, and your synapses start firing a bit slower when they're like over 75 years old, right? So, but they still were amazing. It was pretty. It's one of those moments where you just look back at your career and all the hard times you had to go through, and that's anytime I have these great successes, I always look back at the hard times, because just what a great perspective, right? So I look back to the early days of One Bad Son in 2005, 2006. We would literally drive 30 hours to make $300 and play to, you know, 12 people. And the people didn't want to hear it. You know, they were just there for whatever reason. So I look back to those days and all the hardships we had to go through, and the fact that for years no one really believed in us except us, you know. And I look back to those days, and it just gives me that perspective. So when I walked on stage at the Stone show, I can really come on with that gratitude and that perspective and that pure, you know, I was fully present in that moment, you know, when the crowd started going crazy.
Yes, and probably in awe. Now, how many of the 75,000 people were actually in their seats for your guys' set? Was everybody there pretty much? Like, it was a pretty full concert bowl?
I would guess half.
Okay. Still not a bad audience.
Yeah, we'll take it, you know. But yeah, it's one of those moments where you just really feel grateful, you know, because, and the way we got the gig, which I found out after the fact, is Mick Jagger, as you noted earlier, like he's in control of everything. Like there's not a detail.
Yes.
And I talked to their sound guy, and he said, I've been the sound guy for the Stones for 20 years, and I've never gotten more than 2 free tickets to any one show. Even in my hometown, I could only bring my wife and my son. I couldn't bring my other son without having to buy a ticket. But one thing, the way we got the show was Mick, or at least they say someone from the band listened to your music. And as we know from reading about the band, like Mick's the guy in charge. So that means that my guess is that Mick Jagger actually listened to our music before he gave us the thumbs up to be on the gig. So, you know, the idea that Mick actually listened to our tunes is kind of it's a pretty humbling thought, you know.
That is pretty cool. He's well known as one of the people in the industry who doesn't get messed around because of his competence, understanding, and knowledge of the game. And it's an interesting point you make about legacy, because it's not dissimilar with athletes, right? Like at some point, Muhammad Ali shouldn't have been in the ring anymore. You know, he was doing more damage to his legacy when he was losing to guys like Trevor Berbick, as opposed to reflecting on his glory days, right? But it's a different situation with athletes too, because some of them aren't in a position where they can retire, and this is all they know. But at mixed level, it's not like they need the money. It's like you wonder what the motivation is for them to continue to tour 50 years onward into their career.
Yeah, and great question. And I think Mick, like he's in the best shape of all the guys in the band, right? So maybe, and he looked like he could keep going. The other guys looked a little more worse for wear, you know. But so maybe Mick is sort of projecting that his own health and his own abilities onto everyone else. But who knows? I mean, whatever the case,
Keith Richards has looked pretty rough since the 70s. So that guy is just like it's incredible how someone who doesn't necessarily look healthy can continue to output that level of energy. And it's an inspiration, as much as, you know, it might sound like I'm poking fun at him. I'm not. I mean, it's incredible when you see the level of performance that he can still put on at this age. When, you know, he's not exactly the picture of health. Nobody's confusing him for Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it was quite a moment. You know, it was. I'll remember that experience, you know, on my deathbed. You know.
I'll bet. Well, listen, man, I've had you for over an hour. This has been amazing. I'd love to have you back on if you'd like to come back on. And I really enjoyed getting the chance to talk to you today. And I think you've given people a lot to think about. So thank you.
It's my pleasure, Jim. It's an honor.
All right. I'll be checking in with you again soon. Take care, Kurt.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Take care, man.